Bank of Nigeria, as the BOI's gender desk and agric desk, and there's this repeating the same, plowing money to repeat the same initiative across several government agencies. Whereas we've seen successes where, for instance, in the last administration, funding was given or was seeded by the government to a private equity fund, Sahel Capital, that was able to invest in businesses. So where government can bring money and give it to the private sector to actually directly invest in companies in a way they have better expertise to do, can help really make more funding available, because what you're seeing is funding is almost trapped in government agencies and is hardly going to the right people. And in some of those ways, we could be a little bit more dynamic in basically sort of harnessing capital and putting in the hands of private players to invest and disperse.
I consider this as comment, not an answer to my question. Okay. Please, the gentleman to the left.
Hello, my name is Samai Boni. I want to start with an apology. I'm a capital market operator, and I think as capital market operator, I think we have failed the business environment in Nigeria. I heard all the panelists talk, and everybody is talking about money market. But honestly, for money for development and the kind of projects we're talking about should actually come from the capital market. Now, as a capital market operator, one of the biggest challenges we have is able to convince private entrepreneurs to take their company public. Because once you take your company public, then you have access to the capital market. It's not just about the secondary market being listed, but there's FFDQ, and my colleague from NIPS can tell you about all the other products that are available. So things like crowdfunding, things like venture capital, you can actually access money on the capital market. And once you access money on the capital market, you don't have to do with double digits interest, because all the returns from the capital market is dividends. So for me, I think that's why I started with an apology, because I think as capital market operators, we're not marketing the availability. The pension fund has money sitting down there. There's money on the capital market. There's money on the secondary market. So for me, I think when you have a capital requirement, talk to a capital market operator, do an investment proposal, and take your product to the market. Now, if you have all the issues around, I know it took a while for even institutions like Dangote. It took 5 years of convincing for PwC and those kind of institutions to even get Dangote to go to the market. But as soon as Dangote got to the market, it was able to access cash, unlock equity, and make money. So for me, I think we're not always be looking towards the money market for funds. So we should look at capital market. But capital market has its own challenges, because you have to have a level of corporate governance. You can't be a family business. You can't be a one-man business. And that is an issue we have culturally, because most of the small and medium-scale businesses are one-man business, and they're not open for the public and public scrutiny. So I think we need this advocacy around looking at the option for capital market. We'll continue talking about it until more and more examples of success on the capital market are available.
Good morning. Good afternoon. My name is Femi Aofala. I'm an investing professional, and I do a number of financial advisory work for SMEs like yourselves and too. One of the biggest challenge I think will pose into mobilizing finance in this kind of the country, in this part of the country, is basically that investors are out there. They understand the risk of this market. They also understand the returns of the market. But because these investors, venture capital that you call them, or private equity, they've taken funds from limited partners, and they've promised a return. Now, the question is this, is for them to clearly identify the opportunities that are available, they need to be able to understand the market and know the market. So where the issue is, and I believe, is that we don't have accessible market data on certain sectors. So for example, you are into fruits and agribusiness. If I want to know the consumption of pineapples in Nigeria over the last 6 months in a particular region in Nigeria, I can't get it. It's just going to be gut feel, oh, how many people are selling here? Who sold this? So the level of data to analyze investments is not institutionalized. And that is the key thing, I believe, that everywhere in the world, when you go to places like South Africa, you have demographic data in corridors around the various states. Even in places like North America, you can at least get some level of data. And I understand our Nigerian Office of Statistics is focused on macro data and big commercial inflation and purchasing managers and things. But for us to get to the environment where we are dealing with the informal sector, there has to be a conscious effort to either go on omnibus surveys or go on some kind of surveys to be able to give investors an insight for them to make a risk-adjusted return. So there's no problem about the risk. There's no problem about the returns. There's no problem about mobilizing capital. I just want to know, how is this market? Now, there are some well-organized markets, you know, and Augusto and Co. does a lot of reports in some sectors like oil and gas, so you could get that. But when you go down to understanding adhesives, so I was in a meeting with a client and who wanted to start up an adhesive business that is used to take care of cars before they are sprayed, you know, to clean up cars. And he asked, what's the market size? I don't know, you know. I probably have to go to my panel beta and ask him how much does he buy every day, but it's a huge market, you know. So the key thing I would just recommend here is some kind of system, some kind of structure has to be put in place to identify market research data that investors need to quantify this kind of opportunities. Thank you.
Any questions? If not, please.
Well, I didn't see much questions. There are comments. And I heard my friend from the stock capital market. He's then telling the president of the Charter Institute of Top Broker is here. My view is the beauty of any capital market, it's transaction costs and liquidity. And despite the euphoria about the performance of our capital market, we all know that the liquidity is still very, very shallow. Because there's no guarantee that if all of us, and given the way our markets perform, sometimes we'll expect that when money market is up, capital market is low, and vice versa. We all run from the same risk. And so when there's a dumping on the capital market, the absorptive capacity of the capital market is very, very weak. That's one. The second thing, again, that I've not encouraged many people, at least small, I know there was a time we have the second-tier capital market. We still have, and I know why I say we have. How many of them have been nurtured to grow into first tier? In fact, we're looking at even the third tier to do. So, you know, there is the governance structure to encourage self-regulation, discipline amongst ourselves is still not there. For anybody who was in this market that suffered all the margin losses around the 2008 down the line, a lot of people don't then come to the capital market. But whether we like it or not, there are sufficient resources locally that we're not mobilizing, and government isn't helping it. That's one. And I agree with Awofala that talked about absence of data. Because if you don't have data, you can't even analyze value chains. In terms of work that we've been trying to do, to even understand some of the work being done around the agri value chain, around the entertainment value chain, to ensure that we channel appropriate resources to this value chain. But you can't believe that deep as we try to deep to find data, they're not there. So, for instance, Nigeria is a place where we have very good ginger, right? Everybody say go to Kaduna State. You have the best ginger in the world. The question is, give me your data on the size of the ginger market and what, you aren't going to get it. So we're not spending time to find the resource. And markets thrive on what? Data and information. So that's why we're not mobilizing it. So one of the things I think we need to do much more in detail is how do we begin to invest in data Now, it isn't that the NIBSS, MBS do not have these resources. They do have, but they are poorly funded. So a nation that wants to thrive in its financial market must put money to ensure we have data. The other thing that I always worry about is when I hear people want single digits. Single digit. Anytime I say, sometimes when we operate as investors and savers in banks, we want rates that are inflation reflective. So you don't want to put your money in a bank today, and then of course you don't earn any interest. But when the same people come to a bank and want loan, they want single digit inflation. So which is why I always tell people, I say, so how do you want to help these bankers? These bankers have significant transaction costs. They run their own, almost everything. So, and a typical pricing will require that you have your financing costs, add your operating costs, and a few things. So it's important for us to look at all these things. But more importantly, our government need to stop crowding out the financial market. And in the morning when I heard the DG of the budget and saying that they are borrowing money, they want race together, I said, you God don't have business there at all. Don't have business there. There are other ways you can raise funding. You are crowding out the private sector so much so that even the small money there is not available for those who want to invest. And if I am a bank, why would I put money in a risky venture when in a risk-free market I can have an effective yield of about 13-14%? I'm paying the savers maybe around 4-5%. So there's a huge sum to cover my costs and make profit. So you need to then encourage all of these things to work in tandem. Government should get out of it. And then let the available market go to areas where people need it to grow the economy. But that is not to say that there are insufficient resources in this environment. We're not channeling it appropriately. We're not tracking it appropriately.
Thank you. Please.
Yeah, okay. One other area that I think we should look at critically in my mind is even trade within Africa, within the region. It's been a major problem. I've been opportune to be part of some working groups and committees that Central Bank spearheads to see how we can address that. We know there's so much informal trade going on, or so much trade that we call informal, between the different countries, and that will include Morocco and Nigeria, if you ask me. The question is, when we make payment, when people make payments for those trades among themselves, what is the mode of payment? Is it really that local or domestic as one would expect? Or, most of the time we all use SWIFT or use some other systems whereby, that is so highly dependent on other currencies outside the region. This is an area that is giving a whole lot of impediments. There have been experiments done. Thank God for the card payment system. With cards, there's some kind of interoperability around the different countries in the world. But when it comes to other modes of payments, transfer, often you want to move money from Nigeria to Morocco, it has to go maybe to Belgium before it comes over there. Cross rates, you do the conversions and you lose money, and at the end of the day, it becomes so costly. This is an area we need to look at. There have been, within ECOWAS, for instance, there have been attempts to have a common currency. I'm aware that at the moment, Afrexim is trying to work on a kind of a common payment system, retaining the different currencies of the different countries. They have a common payment system, more like having a one switch, so that for those payments that go across the different countries in Africa, they can be processed through that without it having to go outside. I see that as a serious impediment. And I want to comment quickly to what Mr. Jayala said earlier, the issue of inclusion. I was looking at the profile of Morocco, I observed that we have some similar issues there around the issue of inclusion. The available statistics we have, the FINA one that we all quote every now and then, as our 2016 says, we have about 41.6% of adult Nigerians excluded from the financial system, 41.6%. And I was looking at the report of Morocco as at 2014, about 41%. are said to be included, meaning that about 59% are actually excluded. I think we have a common problem there that we need to really see how we can share ideas, how we can solve that problem. Within Nigeria, I'm aware that the financial system, the banking system, has a number of schemes in place to boost and grow financial inclusion. The central bank is bringing in some new players, new entrants in the system. They're encouraging fintechs who can use technology and leverage mobile phone penetration to really get people on board. Because, like Mr. Jayala said earlier, when you have so much cash outside the banking system or outside the system, it's not in electronic. People don't trade in electronic form. You don't have data, number one. Number two, the banks that are supposed to lend don't even have enough liquidity to give the lending. So the whole lot of things going on in Nigeria. Earlier this year, the banking community started a new project we call SANEF, the Shared Agency Network Facility, by which the banks working together have given me the commitment to grow the number of agents all over the country to 500,000 by year 2020. As at Q1 this year, we have a figure of about 50,000 agents all over the country. I want to grow that. And why are we doing that? To grow financial inclusion, people must have access. You need to grow accessibility, where people can go, even in rural areas, to open accounts, put their money in, or when somebody sends money to them, they can go and cash out, they can do cash in and all that. And with 50,000, we can't really do much. We have about 6,000 bank branches in Nigeria, and most of them you find in the big cities. You don't find them in the rural areas. So it's a major project that is going on right now, that this year alone, we want to have up to 100,000 new agents. These are individuals who will be in those communities. Some could be guys who already do some kind of business. It could be a drugstore. It could be somebody already selling airtime who could now be appointed by a super agent or by a bank to do some basic, open accounts for people, be able to really get cash from them to put in the account for them, and be able to help them to do withdrawal from their accounts. And at the end of the day, even get to the point of being able to administer microloans to those individuals, helping them to package and all that. And we're hopeful that if we can grow that to 100,000 end of this year, if you add another 150,000 by next year, 2019, another 150,000 by 2020, we're hopeful that if we do all that, if you increase accessibility, that should really help, so that those that are supposed to give credits should really have the money in their hands to give out. Because we're seeing a pattern now. The fintech community is growing all over Africa, including Nigeria here. But if you observe closely, the support that most of these fintech guys, the young guys are getting, those in disruptive technologies, the support they are getting, most of them are outside this country. The venture capitalists that are supporting them, they're all in the social media being announced. They are from outside this country. And one will begin to worry, why is that not happening here? And those are things we need to look at really, really seriously and see how we can help people like well,
why it is not happening?
Why is it not happening? We can begin to ideate a whole number of reasons. A whole number of reasons. The very first one is the high dependency on cash in Nigeria for transactions. So much dependency on cash. To solve that again, the whole, in NIBS, we introduced the instant payment service way back in 2011. And that has been growing. In fact, from available statistics, we can see that we're winning the war against cash gradually. Throughout the so-called depression period, the volume of payments keeps growing. 2016, we recorded, in NIBS alone, interbank transactions alone, we recorded about 300 million transactions in 2016. 2017, it doubled to 600 million. This year alone, from all estimates we've got, in fact, as at October ending, we recorded 900 million transactions. And that includes instant payment transactions, it includes point-of-sale terminals. Because all POS terminals in this country cannot go through NIBS, so we have the figures, and we go to our website, we publish all of this. 2018, we should have about 1.2 billion transactions that will happen. So really, a lot is being done to ensure that we solve those problems, but it is gradual, it's not really growing. Because if you don't mop up the money, really, from those who have it, those who keep the excess liquidity, there'll be no money to lend out to people. I see that's a major one. That's one. Secondly, the problem of trust. Yes. Problem of trust. Mm-hmm. Even for peer-to-peer lending, for institutional lendings, we don't trust ourselves. We don't trust even corporate entities. I mean, certainly there are human beings behind the corporate entities. And that too has to be addressed. Banks give loans out. The NPL, non-performing loans rate, is so high. And I observe in Morocco too, there's something close to that from the report I was reading. We need to really discuss together and see how we can share ideas and solve this problem. So if you can fix all of these problems, I think we'll really be getting to a point where banks will have enough liquidity. And when I say banks now, I'm not talking about commercial banks alone, because in Nigeria we have different categories of banks. There are microfinance banks. Apart from the government one, the development finance, the Bank of Industry you mentioned, there are microfinance banks. And now Central Bank is at the verge of licensing payment service banks. In fact, just last week, a new guideline came up to stratify microfinance banks to further strengthen them, so they can meet the needs, even lending needs of the small businesses who the bigger banks may not really have time to attend to. So we have all of these ideas on the table, implementation going on. I'm just praying that we can all collaborate and speed up implementation so that we can begin to solve these problems. But the problems are there, no doubt.
May I come in? I've also noticed that a lot of government, like I mentioned before, development finance is driven through banks. And from your conversation, it sounds like, there's a bank-led model to sort of like disperse capital and lead investments. And I think that only sort of speaks to one sort of, if you look at the suite of businesses, if you look at the early to late stage businesses, bank lending can really only talk to a small group of entrepreneurs, a small group of businesses, usually very mature, 30, 40 years in existence, with trade finance, etc. So I think we should also, sort of maybe broaden the conversation to talk about how, domestic capital can also support the rest of, of businesses who are not necessarily ready for bank finance. Because I think in Nigeria, we often speak as though the bank is sort of like the first port of call as a lender. And that might be the case because of the structure of the country. But in other countries, it's not actually. And, there's a lot of finance available for businesses and entrepreneurs before they even sort of arrive at being, qualified for bank funding. And I think that we need to sort of look at how we can sort of also amass domestic capital to support, earlier stage funders, venture capital, all these other people who are actually more aligned to invest in entrepreneurs than banks.
Well, thank you, Afi. So, do we have another round of questions? 1, 2, and then I will ask my 3 panelists to answer my question so that we can really finish exactly by 3 o'clock, because I've been promised a reward if I finish by 3 o'clock. I will try to do that. Please.
All right, thank you very much. My name is Adetunji Ramini from Solar-Centric Technologies again. Interestingly, I am one of the pioneers of cards and payments in Nigeria. I know you very well. And I know there's been so many initiatives, and I'm happy there's still many going on. I'm heavily involved in access to energy right now. So you interface heavily with those who are totally financially excluded. I mean, extremely financially excluded. You need to take solutions to them. They are totally in remote areas. To lower costs, they need to be able to pay to us. I know we're looking at solutions. But what I noticed recently, the CBN had to come down very hard on the banks for transactions that fail, that needs to be reversed. You pay a fine of 10,000 naira. Now, this is what happens. I was at an ATM machine one day, and this lady, fairly old woman, tried to draw cash. She was debited. She didn't get the money. Same bank, same card. She walked in. They told her to wait 24 hours. She burst into tears. She didn't even know where to start from. That money was sent to her for something critical. I don't want to get into that because we had to gather together to raise money and give to her to walk away. Look at the ATM machines today. Everybody just queues. We have banks today who limits what you can withdraw to 10,000 naira so that they can take that 52 naira or so. You do interbank transfers, it's the same thing. The growth we've experienced, because I took a time to analyze actually, the growth we've experienced in terms of transaction volume are more of those of us who are already financially included, increasing our volume of transaction by way of opening up and utilizing new channels that were opened up. If you begin to look very critically at interaction with them from outside, the type of growth that I would have expected, I'm not saying new sets are not coming on, but the growth that we should have expected is not totally happening. I know there are sessions going on, so it will be addressed. Now I want to come to being able to actually bring in more. Our model of financial inclusion at the moment is bank-led. This is what I say. I always start my analysis from as is situation. They are financially excluded at the moment. So they are not within the system. So there is the way they are operating. The reason CBN doesn't want us to do telco-led is very clear. Now I'm saying they are not within the financial system already. They are out. Can we analyze the risk along the line of the fact that they are not within the system right now? So that risk that the CBN that we are all seeing, first of all, is not there. So that we can then begin to look at telco-led for a certain minimum type of transactions. In the West, I can do tap and go. So it's not all transaction I need to enter my PIN. £20 and below. I don't know if it's been if it's been increased, the limit now. Can we begin to look at that? Because we need these people first of all to even interact with the system, trust the system, and then begin to engage more the way we want. That's my submission. Thank you.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much for those congratulations. The very first one you mentioned we call dispense error, where you go to draw cash, your account is debited, but for whatever reason the machine could not bring the cash out. Really, it is a problem. It takes time because the bank wants to be sure that whoever has come to complain, because in most of the time when it happens, there's no even receipt printed from the ATM. So the bank can only rely on the words of the customer. Unfortunately, it takes time to do that investigation and do that and release the money. But what we have been preaching, what we preach really is that people should stop going to the ATM. ATM is not electronic payment. ATM is promoting cash. Because the cash you want to collect, you want to make payment to someone. Can I do USSD star, somebody and make payment to that person? That helps a lot. Yes, I know there are central bank rules around. I thank God the chairman, the president of CIBN, in sense of bankers, is here. There are rules around how you deal with issue of dispute or complaint of customers. Unfortunately, because of the logistics of resolving these matters, it takes some time. So we tell people, hey, try and minimize your going to the ATM. If you can just do instant transfer, if you do instant payment transfer to somebody, the person gets the money instantly. It's as good as cash. Or you do the star, whatever that all our banks have now. There are many ways you can do that to really run away from this. In fact, I hear complaints that we have about 16,000 ATMs in the whole of the country. And if you ask me, I don't see that number growing. Because ATMs are expensive. They're expensive to buy, expensive to maintain. In fact, putting cash and managing cash into them alone is so expensive. So, I see Nigeria leapfrogging away from the ATM that we see in other countries for so many years. The way the mobile phone has gone, has penetrated the whole part of the country, even in those remote areas, you find so many places where people are able to see 1 or 2 bars in signal, and they're able to do their financial services. I think we need to really promote that more and more. And then you talked about the telco. Yes, that argument has been going on, but luckily, earlier in the year, there was a memorandum of understanding between the EVC of NCC and the central bank governor. So there's collaboration between them now. In fact, that collaboration influenced this new guideline that just came out, or in fact, the exposure draft of the Payment Services Bank. And if you read that guideline, it is there clearly that telcos are now allowed to play in the system. They just need to, but they have to, you don't want to create regulatory problems. A telco that wants to play in the system, in the banking system, will create a subsidiary. And that subsidiary will have to be under complete regulation of the central bank. So I think with that, And then there's the super agency opportunity for the agents. Because they have a good agent network all over the country. There's a lot of collaboration going on between NCC and the central bank, and in fact the telcos and the banks and the CIBN to ensure that we leverage all the opportunities that we have to really make sure that we get finance services to reach everyone. But the other distance will take some time.
Thank you. Afi, you have 1 minute to answer my question, and then we will go, and I hope we will finish by 3 o'clock. 1 minute, please.
So if I remember your question correctly, I think if I had one solution where I think, I'll speak from an entrepreneur's point of view, obviously SME point of view, I think one of the low-hanging fruits for the government, because obviously the government can play a huge role in sort of amassing more domestic capital for investment, would be to just have them be more flexible in the way, in the way they create investment vehicles and lean more on the private sector to be able to invest that capital. I think we'll see a lot more of that money being put into businesses.
Thank you.
Yeah, for me, I differ a bit from your comment on government releasing money. I think there's a bit, government will intervene once in a while just to do a pilot. That's intervention schemes as pilot schemes. I think rather, government needs to create the enabling environment for the private sector to do its private sector business. Let the financial services operators or service provider be able to do their job. You have commercial banks, you have microfinance banks. You have all those banks at different levels who should be able to finance even small-scale industries as well as the big ones. Let's all work together to cooperate with them. And when I say work together, imbibing things like cashless living. It is so important. In fact, I've seen people, even bankers, those who work together to preach cashless. I meet them in ShopRite, I meet them in eateries, in places where you see them paying with cash. Meanwhile, they have their card in their hands. So I think we can help the system. Reliance on government, we've done that for many, many years. I don't know for how long we want to wait. But I believe for individuals that love this country, we can imbibe this new culture and help the system seriously. More money into the banking system, and then and imbibe all this e-payment system. Because in Nigeria, we have a very, very good payment system. We really beat our chest and we are proud when it comes to the electronic payment system infrastructure in Nigeria. The fraud rate is very low compared to other countries because our EMV is fully implemented in Nigeria. We have regulation that somebody just mentioned now, where your bank messes you up, you know where to go to report to. Our POS terminals are well coordinated. Banks there's rules that ensure that banks do not charge even the merchants, businesses, excessively to do payment. There are a whole number of things around that. I believe as individuals of us, if you cooperate and imbibe this new culture, we'll be helping the system greatly.
Thank you.
Well, for me, 3 quick ones. Yes. Number 1, the problem is not always finance. I sit with MSMEs and co, always looking at finance. The problem isn't always finance. Sit with them, they don't even know what they want. So we need significant financial literacy. Do some incubation where we teach them what exactly they need, at what point. Secondly, I was in the banking industries when SME started. At that point in time, the former governor, Sanusi, would debit the bank and take 5% of profit to lend to MSMEs for equity. There were not many people around to assess it. Because again, they don't understand the problem. Today, the current governor is come back again, debiting the same banks to say, we'll make the money available to MSMEs as equity investment. Sometimes they can even give you
They've
debt.
cancelled that, by the way.
All right. It's available. But not too many people is assessing it. But the last one I want to talk about, which I look forward to we can do as Africa, is that today, if you want to transact business amongst ourselves in Morocco, either buy dollar or buy whatever, and elementary economics taught me that money is a unit of account. Payment systems are so sophisticated that without changing from one money to dollar to anywhere, a good payment system, we can exchange transactions amongst ourselves. Because we haven't done this very well, it has significant impact on what they call the exchange rate and whatever it is. Let us trade amongst ourselves. Within ECOWAS here, I'm going to Ghana, I will change to dollar to be able to buy CD. When payment system We'll use our cards, and everybody is credited and debited. We need to work among ourselves to be more efficient. Thank you.
Well, let's move to Continental Free Trade Zone and let's make it reality. Thank you very much. Round of applause for our very able panel. Thank you.
A round of applause to the moderator for taking 5 minutes extra from the 1 hour. Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, in our program, we're supposed to have a coffee break, but they are not ready. I've just gone to check, and so we'll do the next panel, and then hoping that as we disperse, we'll take the coffee on our way home. So the final and the fourth panel discussion will be on how to tap into the potential of youth and diaspora at the regional and continental levels. To moderate and chair this session is the project lead. Regional Engagement Internet for All, Ms. Eniola Mafe. Ms. Eniola Mafe, please.
CP. Dr. Modupe Adefeso Lateju, the Education Partners Center. Dr. Enase Okunedo, Dean, Lagos Business School. And Mr. Niyi Yusuf, Managing Director, Accenture Nigeria Limited.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Okay, fantastic. So, I am Eniola Mafe. I'm currently a fellow with the World Economic Forum, but before that, I was right here in Nigeria for a while, working on many of these issues that I think we're going to talk about today. One specifically around bridging the gaps and bridging opportunities for youth and the diaspora. And I think we sometimes bandy the term youth and diaspora around, and I want to be specific about what we're going to do. And I'm conspiring with my panelists here at their request and also through our discussions to be, since we're at Strategic Dialogues, to be strategic in our responses and also to be practical and no complaints. These were requests. So we will share that conspiring with you and your questions as well. And let's be solutions orientated. When we think about youth, I want to just give a little bit of framework from the Moroccan and the Nigerian perspective so that we know what we're talking about here. Both Morocco and Nigeria are both significantly young countries in terms of demographically. For Morocco, you have about 25% under the age of 15. You have close to about 40% or 45% under the age of 15 in Nigeria. Under the age of 24, you see in Morocco it's another 18%. Between 15 and 24. For Nigeria, it's about 25%. So you see that a significantly young population, and that has with it multiple opportunities and some challenges. I think talking to Enase about some of those challenges that we can, and talking more transparently about that. When it comes to the diaspora, we see that about 5.6 million Moroccans are living outside of Morocco. And for Nigeria, it's somewhere the numbers range from about 5 million to 15 million. I think the number is around closer to 15 million living outside. And that means that they're living in the UK, the US, and others. But I think what is critical is that it's very coincidental that the diaspora has left the country. There's different reasons for that. So we're not going to really talk about the movement of diaspora out and what does that mean and the different ways that they have left the country. What we want to focus on is the productive means by which the toolbox that diaspora provide us and are as tools for national development and accelerating national development. The idea that we're leveraging on the youthfulness of youth, the ideas, the inspiration, the passions, the visions that they have for their future in the long term, and then also couple that with the diaspora who come with experiences from outside, different models and ways of doing things that could be useful to the countries of their origin. And I think that's going to be the piece that we talk about in terms of what is the value proposition and value creation opportunities for these constituents. And I see them as specific constituents who are going to be important in the years to come. So with that, I want to start. Salam, if you may. We talked a little bit around what exactly you work in with OCP, in the chairman's office, specifically around public-private partnerships, around partnerships that develop and mobilize youth, and then also partnerships that engage in community development. Could you talk about a little bit, we talked a little bit about the demographic dividend of youth, and what does that really mean, and how can we get in practical terms of implications for Nigeria and Morocco?
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah?
A little bit.
It's a bit, can you hear? Yeah, okay. Thank you, Eniola. I kind of want to start out by just saying that I personally find this topic very interesting and timely, as I've, embarked on a new journey, and I've been reflecting on the fact that I'm now officially part of the diaspora, the Ethiopian diaspora to be precise. You did mention OCP. I think all of you are familiar with OCP Policy Center, and I've gotten a few questions. There might be slight confusion. Anyway, OCP Group is a Moroccan-based company and a global leader in the phosphate industry and all of its derivatives. It's been a key player in the international market since its founding in 1920. But besides that, and I think what excites me the most is the fact that it's a company that's very much committed to fulfilling its corporate social responsibility. And by that I mean from, empowering women in the countries that it operates, to accompanying African youth in their entrepreneurial endeavors, to building hospitals and schools, and really so much more. Now, you did mention the demographic dividend, and really when it comes to tapping into the potential of youth, that's the framework I want to go with, or the perspective. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the demographic dividend agenda, but it can basically be explained as the rise in GDP per capita that results from an increasing proportion of income earners relative to the consumers in a population, and that's due to shifts in the age structure, but also due to enhanced how would I put it, development or enhanced productivity resulting from investments in health, education, empowerment, and employment. Now, I don't think it could be repeated enough, and it's been said over the last 2 days. Our continent is one of the young. It's with more than 60% of the total population being under the age of 25, and it is projected to being the most youthful region in the next 50 years. It's the demographic dividend is a pressing matter for Africa, but especially for its young people. So, for me, any serious policy for social, economic, just national development in Africa must take, or must consider the importance or the significance of its young people, especially when it comes to, promoting, when it comes to maximizing economic performance, or, and just things like that. I think one thing I would also add is basically, the pace and depth and scope of any nation, really, not just looking at our African countries, depends on how well its youth resources are nurtured, deployed, and utilized. So really, I guess I'll go back to, African youth being the central, just really Africa's biggest potential and asset. And so at OCP, like I said, besides its, being a fertilizer industry, we try to do a lot with young people, like be it entrepreneurship, be it youth empowerment, and specifically in the countries, like I said, that we're currently at, but perhaps beyond. I think I'll stop with that.
No, thank you for framing that. I think the demographic dividend starts talking to the actual quantifiable impacts that youth can have in terms of GDP growth, in terms of all of those. And when we think of it as a constituent rather than as this random group of young people, I think we start getting more deliberate in terms of how to actually utilize. Dr. Modupe, I want to start from the beginning because you work primarily around the kind of education pipeline for our youth and for the future generation, the future leaders. And I'll get to the rest of the panel who's dealing with the latter stages of that once that's been formed. So I thought I'd start with the foundation there. Specifically wanted to talk to you about the Education Partnership Center, about how education policy, particularly in the markets that you work in, can actually tie in to the demographic dividend that Salam is talking about, but also in terms of building the kind of leaders that we would need to be able to push these different countries forward.
And thank you very much, Aminila. I think it's worth reiterating, and I know that we say this a lot, within the education sector, but I think it's worth reiterating that in Nigeria, and I can speak for Nigeria, the education sector is, without a shadow of doubt, in crisis. In crisis in the sense that young people are first and foremost out of school. So millions of children who are supposed to be in school are not in school. Those that are able to access school places are learning next to nothing. And I can tell you that as one who collects data on a regular basis. And we see this not only from the basic education level, we see it all the way to tertiary level. Now, for those who are fortunate enough to get to the stage where they say they want to go to university, I think last year we had 1.7 million young people vying for 600,000 places in universities. And altogether, I think we have about 165 universities, of which 75 are private, charging fees. So a number of entry barriers there as well, not least of all price. So this is a challenge. When young people are able to get access to education, it comes at a huge cost. And if we take it back to education policy, I think that there are significant linkages. But lately, I've begun to think about education from the perspective of education for what? Because within the sector, I think we're rather insular. We constantly talk about the issues that affect us in the education sector, with schooling, with teachers, with infrastructure, etc. But I think the fundamental question is education for what? And if we're able to honestly answer that question, I think it'll have a huge impact on how we formulate policies, but perhaps more importantly, how we implement policies. And so in a sense, I think that there is increasing need for these kinds of conversations, this sort of intersectoral conversations where people in the education sector get to talk to people in the finance sector, who get to talk to people in the health sector, who talk to people in the agricultural sector, so that we get a sense of what education really should be and what it should be doing for us as an economy, and then work backward into education policy and how to implement that policy or those policies.
If you could think, and not to put you on the spot here, because I think I'll be able to bring in Mr. Ni Youssef into this conversation as well, is if there are some levers, some educational policy levers that will unlock or even begin to unlock. I know within NESG, and I don't know all of the figures, there were a number of policies that were set, that were mentioned that could unlock billions in terms of investment, and these were put forward to FEC and put forward to the Nigerian government. As if you are able to pass these particular pieces of legislation, this is what would happen. So what would be that dividend, taking the idea from Salam, this educational dividend that will make the lives of many of us a little easier in terms of dealing with the next step of the education pipeline of sorts?
So if I were to focus more on policy than on legislation, I would say, for example, besides the huge problem that we have when it comes to children not being in school, and therefore us not being able to harness the potential of those children, I would say that we have a significant challenge when it comes to education quality. So even for those who are in school, there is a quality issue, right? Now, addressing the quality issue begins by understanding what the most significant predictors of learning outcomes are. And at the school level, today, the most important factor is still the teacher. And so when we begin to think about policies around teacher recruitment and asking ourselves deep questions about who becomes a teacher in Nigeria, are these the best of the best, or are these the worst of the lot? It's asking those sorts of painful questions and then going into policy to say, we're going to rethink the pipeline of teacher development. And we're going to focus on bringing some of the best and most brilliant people into the education sector through teaching. I think that a simple policy, such as revising the cutoff marks for those that get into teacher training colleges, would go a significantly long way in helping us.
Thank you. Mr. Ni Yusuf, I wanted to bring you in as MD of Accenture for Nigeria, and also been involved in recruitment of the, as Dr. Modupe said, the best and the brightest in your field, consulting, and then obviously engaging with private and public sector. The question around, and from your experience that you're seeing across your portfolio for both Accenture and then Accenture Nigeria, you bring in the best and the brightest into your company. And you send them out. And then you have perspectives when it comes to the Nigerian diaspora in many other countries across Accenture's portfolio. What are you seeing in that space, and what could we potentially glean from that to try to talk about this dividend that dividend concept that we seem to be discussing?
Sure. Thanks, Martha, and thank you for inviting me. So yeah, clearly we all understand that Nigeria is a very youthful society, also a very cultural society, really, in terms of culture and tradition. And so one of the things we've done deliberately in Accenture is just to ensure that we embrace diversity. So I say to my folks, when you're interviewing, interview people who are not like you. So don't look for the next Ni Yusuf. You look for a different person, because the dynamics of today is quite different from that existed a few years ago. And the youth of today are quite different from when we were growing up. And so it starts from that recruitment process, opening it up, being flexible, being agile, to ensure that you attract the right set of youth. So in the past, we will say, okay, if you are 25 or so, if you are older than 25, don't come to Accenture. But now we've removed that, right? So you could come in at 30, you could come in at 20, it really doesn't matter. And so we allow people to come in at different times into that recruitment pipeline. But perhaps the other thing we're also doing is trying to create linkages between schools here and also between schools offshore, and also trying to create linkages with other Accenture offices. And so there's a huge Nigerian population in US, there's a huge Nigerian population in UK, and when Accenture UK does their career fair and co, they send us a long list of Nigerian schooling in UK who attended the Accenture London career fair, and so some of them we then get to speak to and say, okay, so were you guys willing to come and work in Accenture Nigeria, even though you are still part of this global Accenture community. Right. So I think being part of a global organization is useful. So we're able to create that linkage. So we allow people to come in on short-term projects. We allow people to come in on short-term transfers, as it were. And then the last few months, in 2018, I've started going to London every quarter, for instance. So I have drinks quarterly with the Accenture analysts in the London office. Again, trying to create that affinity and encouraging them that anytime they're in town, if you come home to Nigeria for vacation, there's always a desk available for you in the Accenture office for you to come and work. And in the last 2 years, so I've seen a number of them come do commercial type projects, I've seen a number of them come do what you call social development type projects. I was just seeing a number of them resign from Accenture and then come to invest in Nigeria. Some are invested in the agri space. Some are working in the fintech space, which is bubbling. And for all of them, what we say is we are all one Accenture community. And so we try to get everybody involved in that Accenture alumni community. And so when you are deliberate and create those linkages, I think that creates the enabling environment for us able to tap into the energy and the talents of those youths.
Thanks, thank you. But as we know, the youth population, diaspora population isn't monolithic, right? And so I know that there are probably many youth who are not, may not be able to get the opportunity to go to an Accenture, to work at an Accenture and get the opportunities of that. And I asked this, I preface this to move to my right here with Yusuf, got two Yusufs, to talk about the your project specifically around a seat at the table, which to me is so interesting because it's trying to connect not only the bridges between countries, but the bridges within the youth population to have the opportunities. Yours focuses on disadvantaged youth, right?
Yeah,
could you talk a little bit about that project, how it relates to kind of the diaspora potential, but mostly the youth potential?
Yeah, so one thing that has always interested me is in Nigeria, in Africa, in Morocco, but also in Western Europe, in Belgium, you have a lot of disadvantaged youth, but they also have a lot of talent, they have a lot of energy, they have a lot of ideas. But for some reason, we always look at what they did in terms of education, what their socioeconomic situation is, and so on. So one thing that has always triggered me, look, we have, depending on the country and the region, we have 1 in 3, 1 in 5 youth aged under 25, not being enrolled in education, not in training, jobless, unemployed, and so on. So, but again, there's still a lot of energy and potential there that we need to untap, that we need to invest in. So, about 2 years ago, I started working on developing a seat at the table, and a seat at the table is based on one very famous quote by Shirley Chisholm. She was the very first African-American congresswoman, and she once said, if they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. And so whenever I talked with youth, I would always tell them, don't tell me about how bad you have it and what's lacking in your life and that you're coming from the wrong area or what your situation is. Talk to me about what you're going to do about it and how you're going to do that. So I would always tell them, look, opportunity is manufactured. That's a very important thing that we need to teach our youth here in Africa and in Western Europe as well, is opportunity is manufactured. If you were born not in the right circumstances, you can still change your change your situation. Everything depends on how you deal with that situation. So we started this organization, a nonprofit, which is called A Seat at the Table. We teach disadvantaged youth, but also students and young professionals, how to grab a folding chair, how to invite themselves into the center stage of policy and decision making. So what we do is we've developed a trajectory, and we look for the most disadvantaged youth in Belgium. These are youth without a job, from rough areas, rough socioeconomic situation. And we guide them for a whole year long. So we developed this trajectory. It's built in 3 phases. One is find your passion, where we sit down with them, create workshops, and look for their passion. So a lot of youth have potential, have talent, but don't really know where they want to go in life, what they want to do, or what they're good at. So we help them with that. The second phase is find your inspiration, where we do organize round tables with role models and leading figures in Belgian society and abroad. And then the next phase is find your calling, where we activate those youth. So it's not just a random program where youth can enroll in and get to meet a couple of interesting people and go to fancy places. No, once they get in, they're committed to getting out of that situation. So they go from jobless to landing a job, to landing an apprenticeship, internship, enrolling into university and higher education. So that's the last phase, find your calling. So what we do with these youth is we try to take them from the needs, their needs situation, and needs, if you don't know what that is a youth aged between 15 and 24, not in education, not in training, not in unemployment. Basically the most disadvantaged youth you have in every single society. And we try to take them in a time span from need to high potential in just one single year. And we do that by organizing 2 events every single month. And so every single month they have coaches, they have mentors. We're working on where they are in life, where they want to go to. We sit them down with young role models, a lot of famous public figures. We have about 100 public figures supporting this initiative back in Belgium. And every single week, every single 2 weeks, they meet leading figures, CEOs, ministers, and so on. And we take them also to multinational, supranational institutions and so on. So you have to imagine youth from the most impoverished areas, from ghettos, so to say, in Belgium. And every single month they sit down with leading figures in Belgium. We take them to the European Commission. We take them to NATO. We take them to the European Parliament. We take them to Microsoft, Google, and so on. We have them enroll in vocational and digital skills training. And throughout the program, they set up startups amongst themselves. They set up on a certain course just to get back into university and so on. So what we do there is we look for youth and we push them, we help them hone their soft skills and their hard skills. But at the same time, we're always convincing our partners, which are supranational institutions, which are employee organizations and businesses, hey, we have this youth, we have trained them for a year. What opportunities do you have for them? Right. So we connect youth with leading figures, with leading businesses and institutions.
Thank you. So talking about leading institutions and leading institutions in terms of the Lagos Business School, one of the most premier in West Africa. And certainly I think there are a number of people who've done, whether it's, their actual MBAs or even certificates and others, it's been kind of the training ground for leadership. Dr. Enase, we talked a little bit, and just to shift away from youth and kind of more into the diaspora, LBS attracts a significant amount of diaspora, both in its academia. I think Dr. Doyin Salami was here earlier. Everyone, my father, I think too. So with what you are seeing, we talked a little bit about that, okay, number one, diaspora is not monolithic. How they left is different kinds of ways, and the value that diaspora provides to the country can vary. We talk a little bit about the positives, and there are quite a few. And I remember saying to you, what about diaspora investments? And you said, I don't want to talk anymore about diaspora investments. There are other tools in this toolbox. Could you talk a little bit about what those tools could be? And I'd like to bring in the rest of the panel around some of those ideas, both for youth and diaspora, to kind of get to a point of what are the tools that we can use? What does the government need to think about in terms of their engagement? We saw that with the engagement of diaspora. We see that kind of in these small, discrete ways with youth. What do private businesses, Accenture, we're hearing some stories from there, need to think about when it comes to engaging as corporate citizens, but also within their own culture? And then kind of we can break through and think about some of the hows.
Thank you. In a nutshell, everything.
Everything. I asked for a lot. I'm very pushy on those.
Thank you very much. First of all, for me to speak about the diaspora and what they can bring, I'd just like to touch on a few points that have been made about the youth and talking about the education of the youth. I think that we're all united in our understanding about the potential that the youth of Africa have. Yeah. I also think that we know that there are challenges in terms of their preparedness to take on the leadership roles. And the principal one, in my view, is education, the extent to which they're educated. Every day I also look at the statistics of the number that apply for university placements and how many are taken.
But you know, I think that that's a small percentage. When we talk about the youth being dividends, we're talking about millions more. In a country of 192 million people, we're looking at what, 70 million, odd million that are youth there. And it's 1.7 of that population. The percentage that fits into university age there, say it's about 30, 20, and then it's only 1.7 that are applying. What happens to the others?
Yeah.
And, you know, if we think about the leadership for the 192 million Nigerians or the odd 1 billion Africans there, it's not going to be only those that go to universities. Therefore, how are we preparing them? And a number of points come to mind. I think that our educational system, the way we learn, for a number of us that are colonies of, you know, our imperial masters there, I think, and I say this because I have experienced it there, that our method of learning perhaps does not fully prepare us for the world of tomorrow. The world that we know today is as we see it, but the future is uncertain, it's ambiguous, it's unknown. Therefore, if that's the future that these youth are going to grow into, what should we be preparing them for? What sort of skills do they need there? So with anybody that goes into a university today, in a couple of years, what they learn in university will be extinct.
Right.
If somebody goes in to study engineering today, the way technology is, you know, evolving at an exponential rate, in 3 years it has, you know. So should we be educating people in disciplines, or should we be educating them in specific skills? And when we look across Africa, when we talk to managers and chief executives about what skills are most needed among the youth, you know, it centers around 3 things: creativity, adaptability, problem solving, communication. Okay, so these are the things that, you know, are essential. And when we think about it, these things are, you know, you need to be creative to deal with the challenges of operating in the environment that we operate in. Now, does the educational system prepare us for these things, or the youth? Are we going to learn this in university? For the population that doesn't go to university, what happens to them? Because they also in communities are going to assume leadership roles. So what happens to them? So I guess we have to put that on one hand, and then let's look at what I think is an asset for a number of countries that have diasporans, okay, for the people that are outside and what they can bring. Is there a way that we can, if you like, marry the two and then see what we can, you know, what benefits can be realized? It's true, in countries that have recognized the importance of diasporans, there's a lot that comes from the funding, but of course I said to you, it goes beyond that. So when we talk about the skills, when we talk about the knowledge, can we think about ways in which we can leverage on the strengths of, you know, Africans that are outside the continent or outside the countries of origin, and then how do we meet them there? I think that one enabler of that is technology. However, we also suffer, this is now bringing me back to the challenges that you and I spoke about a few minutes ago. Technology will be an enabler of things there, because nowadays, I mean, for the millennials, for the new generation people, they don't learn the way I learned. I mean, I'm a digital immigrant. I migrated to this, you know. But with the digital natives, you sit, you know, it's almost innate. It's, you know, something that you pick up, and that's the way people learn. So when we look at the modern learner, you learn from one another, you learn through these tools that are there. But then, so this is a way that we can learn, leverage from the diasporans who have gone to better schools. I know you say they're not, you know, it's not a monolithic group, but then the majority, or well, not let me say majority, a great proportion are those who have been sent to school, elite and middle class and things like that. So we assume that they do have some skills. Is there a way that there can be some transfer of those skills that are there? A lot of people have an affinity and an inclination to do things for the countries of origin. But then most times they've been away, perhaps second, third generation, they don't know how. But yet we have this youth that are versed and nuanced in the local cultures, in the social networks that we spoke about earlier on there. In what ways can we work together, come together on social enterprises? The panel before this was talking about funding, and they were talking about, you know, small and medium enterprises there. So is there a way that there can be funding for entrepreneurship that comes from this as well, looking with a lot, you know? So there's a whole lot that we can talk about there, but I think that in a nutshell, we just have to see how can we build these bridges, as the topic said, between diaspora and the youth, and see where we can prepare the leaders of tomorrow.
Does any of the other panelists have any thoughts on that? I think that kind of opens up a lot of kind of discussion parts, and even taking, in the interest of time as well, if there are, and specifically around what Dr. Anese has mentioned, any comments or questions that are from the audience as well.
So I was speaking with,
Go ahead.
I was speaking with a doctor the other day, and he's a doctor who's Nigerian but lives in diaspora, and he said And I asked, so what would it take to bring you back to Nigeria to come and share your sophisticated knowledge and your skills? And he gave a very practical example of what could be done.
We like
and I thought that was interesting. And he said, how about establishing a number of villages for medical personnel who are coming back, from wherever, from the West, from other countries in Africa, and making it very conducive, making it feel like where they are coming from. But in exchange for creating that environment, getting them to teach medical students what they know and to support their skills development and their training within the country. And I thought that was pretty interesting because at the end of the day, in a field like medicine, as I was learning very recently, it will be difficult for a number of countries that are not sophisticated in technology to leapfrog into artificial intelligence, which is the future of medicine. So I thought that was an interesting example. And I think that there are many other examples that I can think of. There's an organization that I serve with called Slum to School, and they encourage volunteerism. They encourage not just Nigerians, but young people from across Africa and indeed across the world to come in and volunteer to help bring children into school who live in slums. And there's so many other examples. I mean, there's an innovation summit that we convene every year at TEP Center. And what we're doing is we're trying to identify what's innovative in the education sector. And it doesn't matter where it comes from. It could come from Nigeria, it could come from Morocco, it could come from anywhere. But what's innovative that can take us into the next level? I think that those are some examples that perhaps we can think about, researching and maybe scaling if we find that they actually work.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Seth?
Yeah, I think that one thing that governments and countries here in Africa often underestimate is how much their diaspora is still cares about the respective countries of origin. For instance, I'm a third generation immigrant in Belgium, but I still go to Morocco every single year, sometimes twice. So I'm still up to date, and I'm still care about what's going on. So I think in conversations with diaspora in the United States, in Western Europe, and I'm talking about the African diaspora, everybody's still very much involved in what's going on back at home, and they follow whether there are elections, how their countries are performing at the World Cup, and so on. Right. So they still very much care, but what we still miss is a sort of platform, a framework to get involved within our respective countries and just go back and not just contribute, but also learn and also look for opportunities to get involved in, to invest in, and so on. So it's a win-win from both areas. I think the Emerging Leaders Program by the OCP Policy Center is a very interesting one. So I got the opportunity 2 years ago to participate, and it really opened my eyes. So I got to see the chairman of the OCP speak about his vision for Africa and what is happening in Morocco and in West Africa, and how he envisions how the continent is moving. At the same time, I had the same thing with Karim from the OCP Policy Center, and that for me was an eye-opener to see what is going on. And again, I spoke with a lot of the emerging leaders, alumni who came from different countries, and they were looking at what Morocco was doing, what the OCP group was doing, and for them, they felt a certain sense of pride to see what the country is doing and where the region is headed. So it would help if African countries and governments and businesses, civil society would invest in different projects, programs, platforms, a framework where their diaspora could get involved in. So I think that's one very interesting angle to get the diaspora involved, and definitely do not underestimate how much the diaspora still cares and still wants to be a part of the narrative of their countries of origin.
And I'm sure even just the digital space has closed that divide. I remember I know now, as my parents who live in the diaspora but travel back, I feel like I know more about Nigeria now than they did. And also, to some extent, my mother will never ever say this in public, but probably more than what she knows now. And so it's because you have Nigerian Twitter, you have Nigerian Instagram, you have all of the things that keep you up to date. Now, back to the dividend piece. yes, that's great that I learn all these wonderful things. But just to put a point for Yusuf, second time in Nigeria, clap for him, this year actually, and already about 4 or 5 potential projects underway. So, you know, I think when we talk about dividend, that's the dividend there, that even from interaction between diasporas who have a shared understanding of the continent to build in these actual projects that are on the ground. I do want to if there are there questions out? And timekeeper, where are we for time? If we can just keep going, it's fine too.
I just add to what
Salam, please go ahead.
I just feel like I should add to what Yusuf was saying about, you know, diasporas caring and, you know, governments having a huge role to play in that, enabling that connection and that access to this, you know, to diaspora professionals. One example I want to give is, I think I mentioned it to you earlier, and it's literally the newly established Ethiopian Diaspora Trust Fund. And this, you know, you may think, oh, why is it special? It just, for me, it exemplifies how diaspora communities respond to what, you know, governments ask. This was following a request by our Prime Minister, Dr. Abiy Ahmed, who spoke to diaspora communities in the US and really just everywhere. And, you know, he made it so easy. He was like, if you could just spare $1 a day from your coffee or lattes and put that, you know, into a fund. And when I say fund, again, we don't want to go back to that, you know, sense of charity or helping, but really it is that.
If you see it as a unit of faith,
it's exactly
that a diaspora has in the country, that the money turns into a credibility, right?
And it is already, you know, it was launched literally 3 days ago. Within the first 24 hours, over $60,000 were raised. And imagine, you know, that in 6 months' time or 1 year's time. And that's supposed to go to primary critical socio-economic development projects back home. Again, this is government-driven, but together with, you know, diaspora. So I think, honestly, there are just so many opportunities, and be it using technology and private sector, and it's everybody's job, but it can start somewhere.
Mm-hmm. I may be going rogue on this because no one's told me to stop, so I'll keep going. Okay.
Just one comment, Matthew. And I think if you look at the Nigerian economy from a GDP point of view, right, even though oil and gas account for a huge portion of our revenue, but in terms of production, it's more services laden. And the fastest growing sectors today are things like entertainment, banking and financial services. Right. And these are payments, and these are sectors where things have grown despite the issues and without the active support of government. Right. So government has a role to play, but we also have seen instances where youths have come together to get things going. I mean, what we're saying in Yaba area, with the fintech and with the payment and with the technology sector, these are all Nigerian youths. Some local, some also Nigerians in diaspora who have decided to come back home. So that is happening. What is happening in Nollywood, what is happening in music, it's all the energy of the youth. So, and that cuts across different markets. Nigerians in diaspora today do a lot of watching Morocco TV and watching all those Nollywood skits and co. And so the opportunities are very clear. I think what is missing is for government to see it to take deliberate steps, like she's explained with Ethiopia, and deliberate steps to harvest those opportunities. And it starts from walking in the shoes of the youth and the diaspora. So you don't want a 70-year-old person designing frameworks and ideas for the youth. So I mean, as it talks about being a digital migrant and digital native, right? It's only if you walk in the shoes of the youth or the diaspora that you can then design products with them, for them, And I think that for me, it's the first place to start from.
And when you were saying this, the thing that popped into my mind is thinking of youth and diaspora as almost an asset class.
Indeed.
Right? And if you think about them in that way, and maybe even not to put NESG, AEDPI, and OCP on the spot, when we're talking about the types of publications or reports that could help, even Lagos Business School and others, that could help to start breaking down the conversation into how do we tap into the youth asset class? How do we tap into the diaspora asset class?
Absolutely.
For Morocco, for Nigeria? Because just to echo what Kareem had said earlier, I mean, when he said about the issues in Morocco, I was writing them down and ticking them, thinking this is Nigeria, reducing inequality, bring population together in harmony, gender inclusion, youth education, and the hopes and realizing the hopes and visions, dealing with youth unemployment. I mean, you could take out Morocco and insert Nigeria or insert Ghana into this. I know that there are questions that people have out here. Sorry, the gentleman in the front had been waiting a while.
Thank you. The name is Afolabi Oladile from African Capital Alliance, and I'm addressing...
If you could speak up just a little bit so that the panelists can hear you.
Afolabi Oladile, African Capital Alliance, and I'm addressing this to NSA. The fear is already there of creating a dual class. Speaking as a small employer, because we have a rather small organization, over the last couple of years, I could almost say that practically everyone that we've engaged has been from diaspora. And that centers around the questions that you've raised in terms of productivity, in terms of adaptability, communication and expression. And one of the biggest fears we have is a situation where those who come locally, they're almost in a ratio 1 to 10 in terms of pay scale. It comes down to what's basic in driving productivity, work ethics, your ability to express yourself in writing, and so on. So I know we do a lot of work with you in terms of support. Is there a way of doing some cross-fertilization where those who are already here from diaspora, who are working in institutions like ours, can be of help in upgrading some of those basic elements that are not even technology-based? That's one first question. The other one goes to Munduke. We have a number of HNIs who put together an angel fund for the last 3 years, significant amounts of money, targeted at chemical engineers from Nigeria. One of the first things practically crashed the program was that when they were asked to bring forward business proposals for support, and your colleague, Onokoya, Dr. Onokoya, whatever, he works on that panel. Practically all of them failed. Not being, even in the cut and paste, so many things were lacking that made it impossible to be able to help, even where you had the HNIs. What do you do to take advantage of those foundations that are supporting the likes of you, high net worth individuals, who are prepared to bring their money on the table to facilitate youth engagement?
We'll take 2 more questions so that we can do a round robin of answers. So, yes.
Hi, everybody. My name is Shay. And this is more of a complaint. I don't know, as a youth, most people here are old anyway, so. I'm more concerned about the relevance of education. I have about, say, 2 years work experience, and a lot of the things that I know now, I learned on the job. I'm in school, so I studied international relations. I have not used maybe 2% of what I learned in school so far. And so, like, between education and employment, I'm guessing this is more for Dr. Enase and Mr. Nii. How do we you know, employers want one thing. The school is teaching you something else. You look incompetent when you graduate. You're unemployed. And then you want the best education. Everybody wants the best education, but it's overpriced. You want to get, you know, a graduate degree. You want to go to LBS. You want to go to Harvard. How many people can, you know, afford that? And then we talk about, oh, you know, population of youth out of school. You know, it's all very, I mean, it's just very, it's a concern thing. I like what Mr. Youssef is doing, you know, with the youth in Brussels who, you know, can't afford these things, and then they hone their soft and hard skills. Nigerian youth, I know that we hustle a lot, so you gave the example of Yaba, you know, you have all these startups coming up because, I mean, we're now learning that, you know, if you don't get these things, you have to learn yourself. I think I'm just more concerned, how can we sort of revamp education such that I don't come out of school, you know, my parents have spent so much money and I'm like, what's the point, you know? And then somebody is telling me, oh, sorry, you get these rejection emails. We're sorry, you don't fit the profile. What do you want from me, you know?
My apologies. I am going to cut you a little bit short here because I do want to make sure, but just to say that I heard you here, how do we build employable, demand-driven education system or pipeline that will ensure employability and be demand-driven? So I had to cut you off. My mother taught me not to do that, but I have to use that. Just to take one more question.
Okay. My name is Mohammed Suleiman from Nexim again. Okay. So I'm Mohammed Suleiman. So, like, sort of in addition to what she said.
Okay, so is that a ditto or? Yeah,
okay. I want to, like, you know, to some extent, give a practical example of myself. Although not like her, I worked for like 13, 14 years. But when I started work, like she said, the academics is completely different from the reality. And honestly, I blame our education system. So that's what makes, you see, people going to, or youths go to, or the whatever, we go to school to just get the certificate. Come out, then you start learning what to do with your life. We used to have technical schools where maybe you'll be taught one or two things on, even if you come out without any even employment available. In one of the programs I attended recently, we are analyzing the situation, like especially the Nigerian situation. We said, okay, the government, the government spent like 70% of the budget on the recurrent expenditure. Sure. And if you look at significant part of this recurrent expenditure goes around with payment of what? Salaries. Is that sustainable? No.
So
and if you go and check...
I'm going to ask you to frame it into, I'm hearing the need for technical, vocational schools. Yeah. I'm also hearing from you in follow-on conversation around what is the role of government in this in terms of expenditure on education. Is that what I'm hearing from you?
Yeah,
I
sort
know
of.
Okay.
Not, should I say qualitative education?
So I want to be able to give a space for our panelists to be able to answer the question. Yeah. So I know I am being the bad guy here, but I want to make sure
not really.
there is a good response. We're taking one more very short, and I will cut you off. So it better be short.
Thank you. My name is Moses Omogena, and it's beautiful what Olateju said about educational reforms, and who are the teachers. But in educational reforms, can we also break away from the traditional formal ways of learning? For example, can we have a synergy or partnership of the educational industry and the sports industry where we can start having sports scholarship?
A child, for example, who has zero interest in algebra, but really has a great skill in tennis or football, what is the lot of that child? Yeah.
Great, thank you for those questions. Whoever wants to answer?
I think that one was addressed to me specifically as to what we can do. And in answering that, perhaps I can speak on the point that Sheyi made as well.
And if I can add another request is some of the kind of charge and pieces to round up. But I will be asking each of the panelists to respond as well.
Okay. You're right. When you talk about the skills and the attitudes and the aptitudes that people who have schooled elsewhere bring, like all generalizations as to the graduates that come from here, there are apt to be exceptions. I never was one. I'm a made in Nigeria product, at least my primary, secondary, first degree, very much made in Nigeria. And I think it did me a lot of good. However, I was never one of those that felt, foreign graduates are better. But over the last 10 years, unfortunately, I see that I also, in my recruitments there, those are the ones that are coming in because of the skills that they bring in as well. How do we transfer this to those? I think that Yusuf had made the point about the need for fora, or if you like, bodies through which people who want to volunteer and give back and give. I do find it challenging. At my school, we have a project that everybody who graduates, every class must take on a project. So every alumni class must take on a project. A number of people take on projects in education and healthcare. And in education, they've experienced a lot of challenges. One of the things that they started to do was to see whether they could train, for some classes, to train the teachers. But even to train the teachers, you just cannot come. There's a whole series of approvals that you have to get. They went to some schools thinking, okay, let's leave the teachers and then let's train the students on mathematics, which is an essential skill, in today's world, especially, moving towards technology. For an entire school of 600 people, they had only 2 maths teachers who knew very little maths. So they knew that they couldn't even teach the students. They had to start with the teachers in the first instance there. So, these are the challenges I talk about. However, we need to have a body where this can be done, but it could be done on an informal basis. Why don't you have a volunteer scheme in your office, as a number of people, of organizations do, in which you undertake that X number of hours are going to be devoted to this secondary school that is not the top ones or that pay, those ones there. And every few hours, 5 hours, my people can go there. It's not time that they have to sign for or account for and then give back there. I believe that if in little ways we start to do things in our immediate community, we can build concentric circles that can make a difference in that regard. As to the point about coming out of university and finding out that what you learned was completely irrelevant, I should say you're not alone. I had exactly the same experience. I finished university, I graduated, what I thought were very top grades. I didn't realize how little I knew, okay? Until I took ICANN and I failed the first time, woefully. And I thought, because it's more practical oriented. But after that, having studied a lot more about education and the way people learn there, there's a learning model that I think it just sort of reflects what we learn. It's called the 70-20-10. That 70% of what we learn comes from on the job. 20% come from mentoring and coaching, and only 10% comes from classroom and formal experience. So I think that it is, an anomaly to come out and feel that once you graduate, you'll be able to run and you'll be able to do the job there. I think it's not going to happen. It prepares us for a certain way of thinking. That's what going to school does for you. It expands your thinking, it puts structure and logic into your thinking there. But it is not the specifics that you use on the job. You will get it on the job, you will get it from mentoring and coaching. 10% you will get from formal learning. So you're not alone, it's normal, it's expected.
Sure. And I think if I could add to that and share a personal example. So like Enase also schooled in Oyo State for the most part, and went to Ife. And then in 1985, Ife was closed down for 6 months because of the ABU crisis. And 4 of those of the 6 months, I was fortunate enough to have a brother whose friend, an uncle whose friend works in an IT company. And so it got me to be going to that technology company called JKK. And so I spent 4 months in my 100 level in JKK, and I had access to a computer. Meanwhile, by the curriculum in Ife, you will not have access, you will not see a PC until your 300 level. So I got a 2-year head start, and And that continued. So all my vacation period, I was doing work experience with JKK, same company. And what that meant was, by the time I served, I got a job with JKK without even being interviewed. Because, I'd built up an history, that credibility with them from part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4, part 5. That was 1. 2, that also allowed me to have a network of mentors and coaches who are the AGMs and the SMs and the managers that I worked with while I was a student in JKK. And so that is important. And I think the second thing is also volunteering, right? So the things that people demand for in the workplace, even if you don't get them from school, you will get them during your IT or COS or whatever if you are such that work hard. And second, volunteering provides an opportunity for you to do it. There are a lot of platforms that are looking for volunteers. If you talk about going to school to teach, there is Teach for Nigeria, there's Junior Achievement of Nigeria, where I also serve. There's a Teach for Change. And there's so many of them, trusted platforms like that are looking for Nigerians who will be willing to volunteer. But unfortunately, we don't have that volunteering spirit. We rather prefer that for every hour that we volunteer, we get something in return. But if you flip it around, and I'm not directing tattoos, I see you're shaking your head, so it's not about you. So it's not necessarily about you. But I know, and I've met a lot of people, I've met a lot of youth who don't understand why they must volunteer. And the first question is, how will I get the money to enter a bus from my place to that place? Right? And so there are those challenges. But I think volunteering, internship, part of the challenges that we have, if you are an engineering student, you compulsorily must do COS. But we don't have such scheme for those who are in humanities and social sciences. And so people then need to deliberately go out and look for those opportunities. So between those schemes, and if you find good mentors, if you find good coaches, if you are within a credible network, so that network is not just I, myself, and my family, because once you serve, you are able to expand your network. Then in the future, that network will help you to also progress.
In addressing the question about high net worth individuals, I would implore you to please don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I'll use a personal example, and I'll use a corporate example. I don't know if you know this, but when I was applying to work in Accenture in 2001, I remember going for my first interview with the HR manager, and the first question she asked me was, tell me about Accenture. What do you know about Accenture? And I said, well, not much, actually. I know it's a management consultancy. It's a great firm to work in, but I don't know that much about Accenture. And this is me, who had come from what you might refer to as a somewhat privileged background. I went to a good school. I went to Unilag. But the point was I was not prepared. I had no idea what I needed to know to be able to get into that sort of organization. Unfortunately, she was merciful and she said, go back. This is what you're going to do. You're going to go on the internet and you're going to go to Accenture.com and you're going to print this out and you're going to study it and you'll come back. And so what she did was she opened my eyes to what I needed to do in order to have a foot in the door. And eventually I did get in. A corporate example, a lot of organizations that are development partners, funding organizations based abroad, want to offer grant funds to local indigenous organizations in Nigeria, but they face exactly the same challenges as you have recounted. And what a lot of them do is they come to organizations like ours and they say, can you attach yourself to these organizations and give them capacity, build their capacity, teach them how to develop a business plan, or in our case, a proposal, teach them how to carry out monitoring and evaluation, help them understand what it means to submit a report, how to write a report and submit it. And so in that sense, we build the capacity of these organizations and they're able to access these funds and they use them well. So I would just implore you, please don't throw away the baby with the bathwater. They have fantastic innovations and wonderful projects that just require a little bit of refinement, a little bit of training, a little bit of capacity development, and they would be excellent. And then pertaining to sports and education, I'm in total agreement with you. I know that a few people in Nigeria have set up sports academies. And I think that those sorts of things should be supported. I think that those initiatives are brilliant because at the end of the day, not everyone wants to do something that is academically inclined. So I totally endorse that.
Last two.
I think honestly most of it has been said, but just within the context of enhancing Morocco-Nigeria relations, I think this is perhaps also something we can look at. How do we enable these exchange programs for, be it whereby opportunities for, I think Teach for Nigeria was mentioned. There are several of those programs that would allow for inter-country exchanges. So I think that would also be one thing to look at, but. Otherwise, it's been said.
Yusuf?
Yeah, so I think we have a lot of leaders from civil society, from business, and from Nigerian politics and Morocco as well. And I hope everyone in the room just understands how important that regional integration is, and that we grow as countries and as a region more towards together, because so much is at stake at the moment. When you look at the future of the continent, the challenges that we face, but also the opportunity and the potential, there is just so much work to be done, and we need to hold our elders and our leaders accountable. There is so much work still at stake, and we look up to you, and at the very same time, I want to remind everybody that the potential is enormous, and it lays in our hands, and it lays in your hands.
Well, on that note, I think we thank you very much to the panelists for your... Oh, yes, of course.
This is very informational for the person who talked about technical education. During the time that we did reforms in education, we added a layer of certification that's known as Innovation Enterprise Institutions and Vocational Enterprise Institutions. Those of you in industry can actually get accreditation to run schools that train skills in respective aspects of economy. Whether it's in the telecom sector, we had those kinds of accreditation schools, accreditation for such schools in the oil and gas sector. Please go to the Nigerian Board for Technical Education in Kaduna. You will get such accreditation. And what we had in mind at that time was that annually we'd be able to have between 300 to 400,000 such skills in diverse aspects of the economy. That was abandoned in the course of time. Then the second thing is our focus has been on diaspora. One of the initiatives we had was, and it was a hit with diaspora faculty that were in universities abroad, was essentially to have a roster of outstanding Nigerian lecturers in very outstanding universities with world-class faculties that would sign on to teaching Nigerian university students, and we had resources designated to place multimedia facilities across the university system so that an outstanding Nigerian lecturer in economics could teach Econ 101, or 101, you can teach, anyone who can teach that. Econometrics 301 would be taught by an outstanding Nigerian in economics to all students across the country through multimedia systems. That way, we would have high-quality faculty that did not have to leave their location in order to connect to home. Exactly. Those are ideas that we can, keep pushing forward, especially as we focus more on human development as against these oil wells that have dried up and will take us with them if we're not careful.
Thank you, Madam Obi. Mr. Jayola, you have a comment. And I'm also hoping, partly because, maybe just because I'm biased with NESG and the volunteering that there is within the NESG system. I am one of the products. Mr. Nee is a board member. There's many, NESG operates and has the largest population of volunteers, I want to think, in terms of think tanks, and that's an opportunity to learn what to learn, because school tells you how to learn, but the real life tells you what you need to know.
Thank you very much. And just to say that just at the summit that ended yesterday, the NESG and NUC signed an MOU to get involved not only in the curriculum development of universities, to even help in even the lecturers. Okay. You can't believe there are over 160 universities in Nigeria. There are about 65,000 lecturers. Less than half of them have doctorate. There are about 186 non-academic staff. And so you find out that some of the lecturers that started from graduate assistant and rose to be professors never left universities. Each time they had sabbatical, they moved from one university to another university. Some of them actually go around 3 or 4 universities. But one of the things we're trying to do is to make sure we connect industry, the government, and the academia together. And that is a major work that we intend to do. Hopefully, Shay, we'll see a very market-friendly employability skills from our universities when this work out. I just need to share that.
So thank you to this esteemed panel for your thoughts, your transparency, and your openness to share both your personal as well as your professional experience. And thank you to the organizers for having us here. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Sorry?
Thank you. Let me... Please, maybe just stand and then...
We weren't sure.
This is probably the only panel that had a group photograph. Okay, because you insisted. And because all of you are also volunteers. So we have to volunteer a photograph for you. It's a youthful panel. Very gender-friendly. Thank you. Thank you. Let's appreciate them. So let me welcome the head Lagos office, Nigerian Economic Summit Group, Ms. Feishayo Ajayi, to do a quick vote of thanks. She's been producing me by remote control. So I welcome you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank you all for the time and effort that you have all put into attending this session today. I want to say special thanks to our partners, OCP, AEDPI, as well as NESG. Putting this together took considerable time, a couple of months to be precise. But at the end of the day, it would not have been worth it if none of you took the time to come into the room today. I'm happy that we've had a range of discussions from macroeconomic stability to talking about alternative financial options to help growth and development across board. I like the fact that we were able to drill down into similarities and complementarities between Nigeria and Morocco. We had very useful engagement within the renewable energy space, as well as the one on harnessing and leveraging the potentials within the diaspora space. However, if we borrow a leaf from what Dr. Salami had said this morning, that we can't just leave these kind of discussions to our policymakers. It has to be driven by entities like the NESG, like AEDPI, as well as NESG. It becomes very important for us to be able to shape the narrative and be the drivers of the change that we would like to see with this engagement. However, in changing these engagements and shaping it is not possible to drive forward without the stakeholders, being you, the private sector, in the room. So it's our hope that this session that we've had today will just be the first out of many that will move down the line, and we hope that we'll not just be speaking, but ultimately we'll have some outcomes in terms of transactions, projects that will become beneficial to both Morocco and Nigeria. On this note, I'd like to say thank you to everybody and hope that you will connect with each other and that we get to see again. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Well said. Well said. Well said. Delivered beautifully. I'd like to thank all of you for being part of this. It's been a very long day. Now Hilton just told me that the tea and coffee is actually very ready. So on your way home, you can just grab a cup of tea. But shall we all rise now to take the two national anthems as we close? The anthems, please. We'd like to have a group photograph here. We'd like to have a good photograph, yes. Please, a good photograph.
check, 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 check.
Please say I'm here.